The question always is, if you were coming up on stage or if you were an athlete and you were walking up to the batter's box, something like that, and there was some music playing to sort of announce you, your walk-up music, what would it be?
Flight of the Valkyries by Wagner.
Nice.
He didn't even flinch. I
No,
love it.
I love it. I'm Billy Mitchell,
And I'm Megan Metzger.
and this is Control Alt Defense. All right, well, welcome back to another episode of Control Alt Defense, and it's mine and my co-host Megan Metzger's pleasure to have on today's episode the one and only Steve Blank. Steve is one of the world's leading voices on innovation and entrepreneurship. But long before that, he was also an airman in the Air Force. And I know a lot of folks know him now, in addition to his time as an entrepreneur and being the author of and sort of the mind behind the lean startup movement. He's also an academic and has really kind of ingrained himself in the entrepreneurial world as the leading thinker on getting some of these youthful folks in the education system into the entrepreneur mindset. So Steve, welcome to Control Alt Defense.
Thanks for having me, Billy and Megan.
Yeah. Billy, I'm going to correct you. You said one of the leading voices. I think you meant legend. I think Steve Blank is a legend. Yeah.
That would
Yeah.
make sense. I've known about Steve for a really long time, and it's really exciting to get to talk to him finally. You know, I used to cover startups back in the day, and actually, you know, had a copy of the Lean Startup, even though I'm not an entrepreneur, just because it was so key to how people were thinking back then. And now, you know, everything that he's done in the defense space with hacking for defense and the Gordian Knot Center over at Stanford, it's some really interesting stuff. And I think it dovetails into a lot of what we've talked about on the podcast recently with, you know, the venture space and the entrepreneurial space really having a moment in the defense ecosystem. So Steve, really excited to kind of dig into that. As Megan said, you're a legend, but I think we want to kind of get a chance to get to know you a little better, as we do with all of our guests, with some more icebreaker type personal questions. And I've kind of teed the first one up for you, so maybe you've had a second to think about it, but we're recording, I think it's, you know, the 29th of October. It's about to be Halloween. So got to ask, are you dressing up? And if so, what are you going to be for Halloween?
Well, I'm considering dressing up as Secretary Hegsworth to scare the heck out of any of the incumbents in the DOD. Or,
Theodopa, you got to correct yourself there.
You know, it'd be a fascinating, if you dressed up, would people recognize you? You know, like maybe you just put like Department of War across your chest just to make it more obvious. Billy, can I do one?
Yeah, do one.
So I have the fondest memory, Steve. I don't know if you remember when you and I met out in Silicon Valley and we sat for coffee, and you know the most beautiful facts about the history of the Department of Defense and the history of war, like more than anyone I've ever met. What is your favorite fact of defense history?
favorite fact of defense history. Well, you know, I don't want to get nerdy about this, but why we got the PBE, you know, and where it came from. I mean, some people remember it came from Robert McNamara, who, again, his bio said president of Ford, but actually he had only been president 6 months. His whole career was as a CFO, chief financial officer. So
Interesting.
when he came in, he was reacting to everything that the DOD at the time had been buying in the 1950s. New jets, couple of generations of bombers, new aircraft carriers, created an entire nuclear-powered Navy. But we had forgotten that we have to pay for maintenance and support and the life cycle and whatever. And so as
Those
a
small
CFO,
costs.
he kind of went, the services are out of control. And so the thing we're stuck with today, or was till this administration, was the legacy of why we got this process, which just then got 60 years of cruft on top of it, was a reaction to
Wow.
buying this stuff completely out of control that no service was coordinating with any other, no life cycle, et cetera. That's a piece of very nerdy history of, you know, if you want to figure out not only how did we get here, but maybe how do we unwind what we did and for the new circumstances that we're in, which is, again, the good news is I think the new leadership in the Department of War are making at least a concerted effort to fix some of the processes that we inherited.
It's funny. That's a nerdy, but I love it, fact. But it actually made me think of the current administration. You're coming in from private equity and venture, and I wonder if they're having similar feelings and reactions of looking at it going, wait, this is very different than how the private sector is working. What
Well,
do
it's
we
very funny
do?
you say that, Megan. One of the things I have yet to see reported in the press is the fact that uh, Deputy Feinberg took control of the two largest acquisition programs, just grabbed it out of the hands of the services, and that's the Columbia um, uh, ballistic missile submarine and the Sentinel program, as well as Golden
Okay.
Dome, are now direct reports to him.
Mm.
Now, you think about it,
Interesting.
we were having major programs managed by people who've never managed or run a lemonade stand. And no wonder why we got in trouble with F-35 and Ford class carriers. So
Yeah.
now we have someone in charge who's written checks for tens and hundreds of billions of dollars. And the good news is, it can't be worse than what we've been doing. And someone does know how
Yeah.
to, at least potentially, how to manage that stuff. So the good news is acquisition for those new major starts. You notice he didn't touch the things that were already screwed up. Will probably be better managed. The bad news is that no one is talking about why are we still doing them. So, and I'll just make a point and then move on. You
Yeah.
know, both the Columbia and the Sentinel are part of our triad, which is a 1950s strategy. And so,
Yeah.
and we're going to spend in aggregate probably close to $1 trillion in replacing them. And while we're looking for ways to make the services more efficient, one would perhaps want to ask, is this the best basing modes? The triad did not come down from tablets on the mount.
Yeah.
It's the 21st century. We should probably at least have a 3-day conversation about, but remember, if you're a prime who owns these things and who will go nameless, that's the last thing you want to have, because all you want to do is, get the program. It's the biggest thing that you're ever going to get in the next couple of decades. So
Yeah.
the good news is, I think the acquisition and the whole acquisition process in the DOW is not just being nibbled around the edge, but torn up and thrown out.
Yeah.
People understand drones are attritable. I mean, we've now said class 1 and 2, group 1 and 2 drones are now, attritable like ammunition, rather than having to go through an entire process. We shot the JCDIS. We're doing all this other great
Yeah.
stuff. It makes a difference. So what was your question?
Yeah. No, this is great. I'll say one more thing, then Billy, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Yeah.
One of my favorite presentations that I saw, this was probably 5 years ago. We were doing an event. It was a ton of senior leaders. We were talking about what do you need to do to lead differently with the pace of technology change. And this former serviceman got up and he brought up the strategy for this service. I'm not going to rat him out. And he briefed it, and it was brilliant. It was all about kind of artificial intelligence, if you're reading between the lines, and adversaries, and then said, this was our strategy from 1992. And we're still it's still relevant. And that's a problem. And I thought, kind of something you said made me think of that. Of yeah, we should probably revisit some of these things, because if we're not hitting those marks, what are we doing here? Anyways. Billy, over to you.
One more fun one, or at least I think it's fun, because I was doing some biographical research on you, Steve, and had no clue you were born in New York City, grew up in the Lower East Side, which I think is fascinating, because I totally associate you with the Valley and, the West Coast, being at Stanford. So I have to ask, where do your allegiances lie? Are you a West Coast guy or East Coast guy? Do you claim both, or do you have one that kind of prevails as what you see yourself as these days?
Definitely a West Coast guy. I've been out here half a century, which is, I'm embarrassed to tell you how many times over that is that I lived in New York. So I definitely say my roots now and my kids were born here, etc. Though I have a daughter living in London. So now
Oh, wow.
And so now I'm teaching in London as well. So who knows where my next roots would be. But right now, I'm definitely a Californian in Silicon Valley.
You're a citizen of Earth. That's what you are. You can
that's
claim
a
it all.
long haul. It would be faster, London, New York. Just saying.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, let's kind of dive into things. I think we've kind of touched on a few of the many hats you've worn throughout your career, but I think there's a way to try to string it all together. And that's, maybe the way you've desired to teach these large and slow institutions how to kind of rediscover themselves in an agile way. So, one of those that you've really focused on of late is the Department of Defense, the Department of War, and really the entirety of the national security apparatus. So let's start there and just kind of touch on, why it's so important and why you have this vested interest in paying attention to the space and bringing others on board and really trying to teach the next generation of entrepreneurs to think in terms of defense and national security and those missions that maybe aren't the most popular to folks in the Valley and in those tech startup ecosystems.
Well, that's a long question. I think if I could play it back, it says, why do I care? And I think now as I got older, I could articulate it. I'll tell you what I unconsciously thought about when I started this. But, as you get older, you realize that life just isn't about technology or IPOs or whatever. It's about service. And at some time in your life, you decide whether you're going to serve God, country, community, family, etc. And looking back, I think I checked most of those boxes, some better than others, in some order. But my commitment to service actually started, as you mentioned, during Vietnam when I spent 4 years in the Air Force, and then got out and entered a different world where service wasn't part of it. At least service if the country wasn't. In Silicon Valley, unless you worked for Lockheed or a company doing some other work, you really weren't focused on that. You were focused on revenue and profits. But I always had in the back of my neck, back of my head, that it would be great if I could figure out how to connect the two.
Yeah.
And that kind of just lay dormant for a couple decades when I went through my entrepreneurial career and then started teaching at Stanford and then created a national program for National Science Foundation, National Institute of Health, ironically called ICOR. But I met two Army colonels, retired Pete Newell, who ran the Army's Rapid Equipping Force, and Joe Filter, who was now at Stanford. And we started thinking about, is there some way to connect students who at the time thought their greatest calling was to do a social media app to actually work on some of the toughest problems and most important ones for the country. And we realized that this class I had built for the NSF, ICOR, had the right format of getting out of the building, building MVPs, etc. But instead of working on students or professors' own problems, what if we went out to the DoD and IC and got their problems and gave them to students? And we had no idea whether anybody would show up. In fact, we had guards at the door, the first class, thinking people would be protesting this thing. This was called Hacking for Defense. This is now the class is now in 60 some odd universities, 3 countries. People take it for granted. And then about 3 or 4 years after that, Joe Filter and I and Raj Shah, who's now Shield Capital, realized that at Stanford, we were at the intersection of all the technology that the DoD needed. And that is the first observation, which is now obvious, but 5-6 years ago wasn't. It was that the technologies the DoD needed to deter or win a war were no longer owned by the DoD, right? Our FFRDCs and primes were not driving AI or machine learning or synthetic biology. I mean, make the list. But we were. In fact, Stanford was ground zero. Number 2 is we understood, and not only I understood, but Silicon Valley understood rapid innovation methodologies, how to get stuff out like now. And then 3 is we were at the intersection of world-class faculty and students. And so I happened to become friends with then Admiral Selby, who ran the Office of Naval Research, and he decided to fund the center, the Gordian Center for National Security Innovation. Fast forward last week, we just had 500 people show up for our defense conference where, 3 years ago, the attendance was 0. That is, it didn't exist. And by the way, this center, which differs from Hoover, which has been Stanford's preeminent organization for national security, is focused around its faculty. The difference is Gordian Center is focused around its students. So DEF CON is student-run, 500 students. VC showed up, ministers from Ukraine showed up to give us lessons learned.
Cool.
Sorry about trying to give you the semester version. And
hey, it's great. There's a lot of great details in there.
But my interest was, listen, this is what entrepreneurs do. Entrepreneurs see a problem and ask the question, if not who, me, maybe me. If not now, like when? And so we just do stuff. I mean, I'm not the first people to make all the observations I mentioned. My DNA is, okay, I don't care if no one else is doing this. Let's just go do it.
Let's do it. Yeah.
And most of them don't work, but a couple of them catch fire and actually,
Yeah. Yeah.
there we
I mean, it resonates deeply with me, and I know you know that that's been a lot of our conversation. And you know, I'll admit, 10 years ago, so Decode's almost 10 years old, which is wild. There was a pivotal moment even for me of going, okay, I see this gap, right? Their tech is just going so
that's
fast, and the government's not getting out of their own way, and they're building stuff that's putting us behind. I think I could fix it. Or maybe do I just leave government altogether because I am so frustrated? And then something draws you back. It's that service. You're going, there's a better way. And if we can help, by God, let's sign up and let's do that. And so it's been really, really great to watch your program even grow, and how much energy has changed. And so I want to ask you, I have my own take, but you know, 10 years, let's go 10 years. That's a long time. And I think back then, when you and I had that coffee out in Silicon Valley, we were still kind of trying to talk venture folks to really try to give a damn about the market. What's been the most surprising shift in the last 10 years out there in the Valley against this problem?
well, I think 10 years ago, the Valley was still recovering from the post-Snowden hangover, which was, mostly DOD self-inflicted. By the way, I don't know if people remember Snowden, blew out most of the NSA secrets, et cetera, and public
Yeah.
reacted negatively, and Valley
What a
said, we're not
time.
going to help anymore. Um,
What a time.
all the DOD needed to say is, two things. One is, or NSA, gee, we can't confirm or deny, but if it's true, wouldn't you like to work for an agency that could do all this stuff? No,
Right.
seriously, that would have tried. There would have been a line out the door if techies went, holy cow, sounds like magic.
Right.
And it was, if it was true. The second is just simply admitting that the country did all these things because we didn't want another 9/11, and that we
Yeah.
felt guilty that we actually had the opportunity to actually stop
Yeah.
9/11 if we would have looked at the data we had already had. But no one wanted to say that publicly in English. And so instead,
Yeah.
we let other people take control of the narrative. And the narrative
Yeah.
was, DOD bad, like etc. So that was the environment. That was just the setup for when we
Yeah.
started. And to me, that was just wrong. I mean, it was wrong because the DOD,
Yeah.
was just incredibly inarticulate, but also was wrong because weren't the facts, and that the facts were we should really care about what was going on in China and Russia and the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And now it's the tipping point for me was pretty lonely the first, much like you probably, the first 5 years in trying to explain this stuff. But
Yeah.
then it became pretty clear what China was doing to the Uyghurs in Tibet and eventually Hong Kong. And then when Russia invaded Ukraine, it was pretty clear the wonderful world you all want to have, particularly when you're in
Yeah.
college, is not the real world that exists outside those hallowed halls.
Hmm.
And it was finally percolating. And then the last piece was, the rise of venture capital. I mentioned Russia and others, but A16Z and Lux and whatever realized that there might be an opportunity here where no one else had gone, because at least in the last administration, they gave lip service to startups. It's not that and the lip service were accompanied by door prizes, but rather than real contracts. But the other model was watching the growth of Palantir and SpaceX and Anduril, and that it was possible to maybe make great returns if you were investors in this
Yeah.
area. And so those were kind of the loss leaders. They required billionaires to start, but venture
Yeah.
capital decided, well, what if we funded these rather than billionaires? And so you had this convergence of the ecosystem
Yeah.
of administration trying to get interest, students realizing that the world doesn't look like they wished it was,
Yeah.
and capital at scale that never existed before for defense startups.
Yeah. I remember there was a gentleman that worked for a tech company that was coming through our acceleration program. And I was like, he didn't have defense experience, but was leading the stand up of their government practice. And, I kind of asked, like, well, hey, why did you volunteer really in the company to come over and do something that you clearly don't know much about? And I quote is, I'm tired of building the next Snapchat. I want to do something that matters.
So if you really push on people, most of them would be interested in serving a mission, right? As I said, whether it's God, country, family, climate, energy, something. And we had never articulated that defense was a possible mission, not just service, for 20 years but that's also possibilities. But, thinking about how you could contribute, because there really weren't many classes or vehicles or acquisition programs on the other side to pull those things out, even if you did want to contribute. And now it's great to see. I mean, my students either go into do defense startups or actually work for agencies. For the policy students, go in government for a couple of years, get some experience, etc. And so it's nice to see these opportunities. Hopefully it'll make a better and safer country.
I feel like I need to throw a disclaimer. I'm sorry, Snapchat. I didn't mean any offense.
Yes, you did.
We're going to get a cease and desist.
Listen, Megan, I describe to my students that Facebook is the fentanyl of the internet. So it's,
there you go.
Anyway.
All right.
Steve, I'd love to pull on the other end of that. You described, I think, very well, like the academic, the entrepreneurial Silicon Valley push and why people are having more and more interest in why your organizations have seen success. And you also mentioned how, previous administrations have sort of paid lip service or given door prizes. And so what is that gap on the DOD side? And, what needs to be done better, or what is being done better to kind of take advantage of this moment in your estimation?
Well, let me tell you a funny story is that if you could remember back 5 years ago, or maybe a little further back, there are almost no incubators or accelerators inside the then Department of Defense.
Yeah.
I think by the end of last year, there was north of 100 and maybe 200.
Yeah.
And
like
that's
Oprah Winfrey was giving out accelerators there for a minute.
And that's the bad news. I'd probably shut 99% of them down if we haven't already, because they're not connected to acquisition.
Yeah.
That is, they were basically, we created innovation theater, not innovation, not innovation. To me, we've been looking at the wrong end of the telescope. The fun part is, let me stand up an incubator and accelerator. No, the fun part should be, how quickly can I deploy something at scale into the hands of the warfighter, and what tools and processes do I need to do that? And if accelerator is part of that, then tell me where the funding is, and tell me, gee, it's in the NDA or, production OTAs or whatever. And when you talk to these heads of accelerators, and again, no fault of their own, they go, well, that's not my problem, or I'm not authorized to whatever. No, I'm not part of acquisition. So you go, well, why do we have these? And again, to shape culture, great, to train people. But I think it actually trains, probably more ex-service people who are going to do their own startups than it does people inside the DOW. So that's number one. But number two is, I think we're understanding that it's deployment with speed and urgency. I think, we just stood up, Joint Task Force 401, and to do the counter UAS stuff, and the focuses on speed. Ukraine has showed us that literally your best and brightest, exquisite piece of drone equipment or jamming or command and control system, it's obsolete. You deploy it on Monday, it's obsolete by next Monday. And gee, if you're not constantly, this is the classic OODA loop, right? The John Boyd, observe, orient, decide, and act.
Absolutely.
If you're not doing, gee, we've solved the EW problem, great, they're now on fiber.
Totally.
Oh, gee, we could knock them out of the sky. Good. Now they're landing, and they're actually sitting and waiting for, their ambush drones. We're seeing literally accelerated evolution of defense weapon systems that was just unimaginable. The problem is our acquisition system and requirement systems. Again, we just shot that, at least piece of it. But the speed of the systems we built were predicated on an adversary, the Soviet Union, that was equally screwed up in the East through the 80s. That is, our speed of deployment essentially matched theirs. We had decades to literally think about weapon systems. Now we, at best, at least we're watching evolution in weeks, months, certainly in less than a year. And then the other part, and that's in Europe and drones. The other side is, we're watching an adversary, China, potential adversary, that operates like Silicon Valley. And on a good day, the Defense Department still operates like General Motors. That's an unfair, that is, and if you think that's just
You're not wrong.
lather, look at the number of DDGs they put in the water every year. I mean,
Yeah.
they've basically, gone from zero to a bigger Navy than we have in probably 15 years.
Wow.
So if you look at that, the systems we built were not wrong, and they weren't built by stupid people. They just don't
Right.
match the problems in front of us.
Yeah.
And to redo that, you need to really think about, how do you want to organize people, organizations, and processes, etc. And so the summary to me is the DOW has world-class people, world-class organizations for a world that no longer exists.
Yep.
Period. And I think this new administration understands that. It's not clear they understand what to replace it with. And I don't mean the tactics that they're doing, these joint task forces, there's whatever, all the right words, but the
Yeah.
overall strategy, I think time will tell.
Yeah.
What matters is deployment at scale of the right systems at the right time.
So I can validate, that I am seeing a big shift, even at Decode, we have the opportunities to support some concepts where they're trying to go from zero to it's like fielded, tested, and transitionable in 180 days. But the difference being they're coming out of the acquisition shops. And,
That's where it belongs.
yeah. And for the last, this isn't meant to be a Decode plug, but for the last several years, we said we need to focus on the catchers. We need to focus on the folks that are going to take this technology. They're going to look at their system and go, but what PE line do you want me to use? What contracting mechanism? I've already got my money spoken for. My requirements have been in there for 2 years. They are the ones that need help. And like you said, we have incredible civil servants. And I agree. Everyone's doing the job they were hired to do, and they're doing it really well. It's just the job's changing.
It's the
very
wrong
fast.
job. Right. I mean, and just as a reminder, we've done this before. Forget World War II. Is that post-war, we built four generations of fighter planes in the 1950s, the Century series. Well, 2 generations of aircraft carriers, 3 generations of manned bombers, B-36, 47, 52, created the entire nuclear navy, attack submarines, ballistic missile submarines, nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, all within a decade. I mean, you kind of look at that and go, the paperwork across the Pentagon takes as long, at least until we start shooting some of that stuff, where everybody needed, again, that was the reaction of McNamara to all that acquisition. And so the cyclical thing, which was, gee, we need to get this under control, we need to build processes, versus, no, we're facing an adversary that's operating faster than us. Maybe we should fire all those processes and worry about, like MLPF later. Let's just get this stuff in the hands of the warfighter. That's a really tough mind shift. I mean, it is hard. It's hard on processes, on people.
Yeah.
Sometimes you shoot the wrong thing. Sometimes you build the wrong thing. But if the focus is generally on rapid deployment in the hands of people who need it now, and remember the goal, at least for me, and I heard this from General Mattis and who's at Stanford, which just reminded me multiple times, the losing hand is that if you have to win a war. The best hand is if you could deter a war, right? And so what you really want to, his line was to make an adversary say, not today, right? That goes for the Taiwan Strait. That goes for Russia moving into the Baltics or somewhere else. Not today, at least if you're dealing with a semi-rational actor, is kind of what you want to have as a credible defense. When it becomes uncredible, when an adversary believes that they could, take out your carriers and whatever, then all of a sudden you've put yourself in a place where you've actually put the nation at risk.
Mattis has one of, there's another quote. I think I've probably used it too much, maybe even on this podcast. So I don't know if I'm being redundant, you just cut it out, but I won't get the quote exactly right, but the intent was, the country that wins the next war is not the country that develops the best technology first. It's a country that integrates the technology into its way of fighting. And I think that's exactly what you're saying. I had an opportunity recently to sit in a small round table with some service secretaries and chiefs, and talking about kind of the strategy. And I won't say which one, but we were going through the core competencies, like what are the top capabilities that the service needs. And my argument was, it should be adaptability. Like that should be one of the core pillars of how the service thinks and operates. But that's just such a mindset shift, right?
So Megan, if you think about it, and this is the point that's really hard to communicate, particularly when you have service leadership who's never spent time in Silicon Valley, is agility and adaptability is the core of what we do, right?
Yeah.
Rapid innovation, rapid agility. We invented the word pivot. We understand when circumstances change. Therefore, our contracting can't be a set of requirements. It has to be a set of outcomes. I mean, it changes everything if you understand what that looks like. And again, that world wasn't necessary when our adversaries were first the Soviet Union and then non-nation states like Al Qaeda and ISIS. Big deal. The problem is, since 2017, we've acknowledged we're in a different space. Um,
Yeah.
and therefore, our processes, particularly in acquisition, should have changed to match the world as it is, not the world that we want. We're
Yeah.
going to get there in this administration. I'm certainly hopeful
Yeah.
underneath the ideological layer that there's a implementation layer that actually has a much different view of what we need to do. That's not just, as I said, biting along the edges, which we kind of understood we needed to do, but there really wasn't the will, I think, before to change how the Department of War operated.
In the top cover, right? Like
Right.
people saying, "Hey,
Definitely
we got
lacked
the
top cover.
keys. We got the keys, but we should still drive it like we stole it."
Right. This gets to the primes, which for me, was one of the nation's greatest assets and also one of the nation's greatest weaknesses. People forget that they're for-profit companies, and so they will do anything to protect their interest for commercial interest. And while they give lip service to, we serve the national interest, that's not the evidence in front of you. That's not who they're serving, and therefore, even if there are systems that no longer make sense, and you can make your own list, starting with X, Y, and Z, it takes a really tough SecDev and president to say, thanks, but your $1 trillion thing is no longer what the country needs. Well, that has some implications all the way down the food chain, because primes are still our best bet for building, exquisite systems or things that are complicated or require hundreds of thousands of people in multiple organizations. So you don't want them to go out of business, but you do want them to change their business model. And now that we have a DepSec that actually understands what the word business model means, those conversations could be an interesting conversation. The best sign of this, just a little inkling, is that Lockheed's venture capital organization is probably one of the most innovative prime under Chris Moran, probably the most innovative prime VC I've seen, almost as good as a commercial VC, actually. If the rest of Lockheed could adapt some of that mindset, I think if Chris was running Lockheed, and I don't want to get him in trouble, or at least some part of it,
you just got him promoted. What do you mean?
You'd find a much different, but those are the lessons. I mean, right? Yeah. He lives in Silicon Valley, is on top of the tech, figures out how to think.
Yeah.
It's possible that, you can make elephants dance. And I think there might be hopefully in some prime boardrooms, some conversations about what's the business model look like going forward.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, we've talked about this, ecosystem, the need for these innovators in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, and also the department itself to be more ready and agile and flexible to move in that direction. One of the things that you've been responsible for and done more recently is your PEO Directory. And I'd love you to kind of walk us through that, because one of the things we all know about that sort of bridge, or the gap in the needing to bridge Silicon Valley to the department, is that it's very hard to navigate if you're not familiar with talking the talk and understanding who you need to be going to. So what made you realize that you needed to bring this to life, and, what's sort of the resulting kind of output been?
Well, the PEO Directory, you should just think of it as a phone book for the DOW. Period. And how do not just names, but how the organizations connect, who works for who, what, where are they, etc. Right now it's about 300 pages. And I'll explain why maybe first and then go back into it. As I mentioned, we've been teaching hacking for defense for now almost a decade, or actually, I think it is a decade now. And our students, as I said, want to go do startups or work with defense organizations. The first thing they would ask is, well, past our sponsor, who else should we call on? And kind of sometimes Pete Newell or Jeff Decker or Joe might know, but I would kind of change the subject or look at my shoes and, whatever, because they've already talked to 100+ people. So they knew more than I did, but they were still asking, where's the money? How does this work? What's this thing called an OTA? And wait a minute, what's a kratom? And wait a minute, do I need a security clearance? But do I need a facility clearance? How does that work? What's a PIA or a tribal? And you kind of go, oh. And then you look at the defense websites and they tell you how to get a SIBR. Well, like a phase one. Well, these students already had MVPs, and so the really number one was, what was the process of, I want to start a company, maybe get some venture money, and how do I sell to the Department of War? So the first 30 pages of this PEO directory is a go-to-market strategy approach. First of all, what's the FAR? What's the non-FAR? Written in English. I mean, it's not that. Here's the side of a building with no windows, or a building with kind of windows on the outer ring. It seems like you're putting all this information up on a website. Well, gee, I already told you this. You don't have a clue how unintelligible that stuff is to a normal human being. I mean,
oh, right. You can't unlearn it,
Yeah, I mean, all of a sudden those buzzwords mean something to you. They're meaningless to civilians outside. So number one, it's not, again, that we're dumb inside the building. Unless you've spent part of your career outside, you've lost the ability to communicate in English to civilians. That's number one. And so how do I take all that information, which is kind of out there, FAR, SIBRs, OTAs and whatever, and redraw those diagrams and rewrite that English for very smart students, but civilians who mostly have no idea how this works. So the first 30 pages is a go-to-market strategy. And what the DOW doesn't say anywhere is that there really are two strategies. One is the patient capital approach. Gee, I want to get a SIBR in a phase one, and gee, I'm happy with a TACFI and a STRATFI, and look at that. And the other, which I now call the inpatient capital approach, which you could find nowhere in the DOW, is I just got VC money who is not going to wait around for 10 years. And the fact that I have a research OTA means they're going to fire the CEO. I mean, gee, that's inpatient capital. How do I get a deal with SOCOM, or how do I embed with warfighters to do rapid learning, or how do I get production OTAs? Maybe someday program a record, but $100 million is good enough. Thank you very much. You can't find that anywhere. But if you interview, the Palantirs and SpaceXs and some others now, the next wave, you'll get that. That's the first 30 pages of this document. The next is, who do I call on? And again, when before social media, gee, this would have been a classified document because none of this information was public, and for rightly so.
Sure.
The problem for the DOW, again, it still is not percolated inside the building, is everything in this document is open source. LinkedIn, ChatGPT, the web, DOW's own websites, etc. So there isn't a single thing I've gotten from anybody. In fact, I won't touch anything from inside the building. Is how do you kind of replicate? Okay, what does R&E look like in OSD? Gee, what's ONR look like? Gee, who are the PEOs? And again, we have 70 program executive offices, which is where this thing started, which is, gee, after Congress, allocates some money, it's in the NDAA, the House Armed Services and Senate, the SAC has put it in there, and House and Senate Appropriations says, let's go spend it. There's a group of individuals who are essentially the program managers who gets the contract, and with their contracting officers, how to allocate the money. You don't know who they are? Well, guess what? I've just been getting emails from combatant commands who didn't even know who the PEOs are. In fact, half the users of this directory are inside the Department of War who are telling me for the first time they can now figure out who they're supposed to be talking to. So I actually went out and who are all the J8s across all the combatant commands and all the services in one spot. Oh, and here they are. So the answer, Billy, the long answer, short question is, look, the DOW is an enormous organization, right? 3 million people if you count civilians, reservists, etc. There's no possible way anybody could figure this out ab initio from first principles. So this is a start for a new generation of startups. Remember, the primes know this. They have tens or hundreds of people figuring this out. Our adversaries know this. They probably have the same amount of people using the same open source I do. The only people who don't know this are the people we're saying we want to actually get into this ecosystem. So that's why I did this. And to be honest, people go, well, how big was your group doing this? This was me for 1 month. I just came back from teaching in London. I had a month and I went, let me just go figure this out. And so the first version was me. And now it's like we update it about every 6 weeks or so. And because all the changes that are going on.
Say, how do you keep up? That's got to be a gnarly problem in this current environment.
Well, listen, it makes it even more important in this current environment, right? Because we're standing up new organizations. The Army just got rid of the entire G9, like, what? Well, who's the G9? No, there isn't a G9 anymore. They're kind of been distributed out. So just being able to keep up with the new task forces and new organizations, help the people who want to help the Department of War. That's the key idea here, is that primes know this, new entrants have no clue. New VCs have no clue. I mean, it's not that they're ignorant and don't know, gee, you ought to talk to a PEO or here's the person writing the requirements in the, in the JH or somewhere else, but what's their name? Where they sit? What base are they on? How do I get a hold of them?
I gotta tell you,
did I answer a question, or Megan? Was this?
Yeah, I mean, I have 2 follow-up questions. One, when you were talking about it, and you said our adversaries like probably couldn't figure this out unless they were like, it's a mystery surrounded in bubble wrap, wrapped in saran wrap. You're kind of democratizing the department in some ways. But
so, Megan, my point
really
is our adversaries already do this, right?
Okay.
Before social media was my point, this wasn't available. Now with social media, it's available to anybody who wants to put the energy to do this.
Yeah. So, I mean, I am a personal user of said directory, so I appreciate the work. I would imagine there's a whole cottage industry of BD folks that are pretty ticked off at you for this. Have you gotten any pushback or any kind of negative feedback on it?
So number one, I don't care. And number two, and most importantly, this is going to raise all boats. So if you think about it, a startup no longer needs to pay $10,000 a month to get a name or an organization. But it doesn't mean BDs are out of jobs or consultants. It just raises the game. Okay, now you know the name, but what do you tell them?
Totally.
Where do they like to go to lunch? Like, what are they worried about in their career? Or, gee, what happened in the last startup they tried? That is now the game gets more valuable. So if the game was, I just gave you a name and told you where they fit, shame on you, right? That really wasn't value added. You were kind of a leech on the system. And I'm not suggesting they're not useful. It's the other way around. They are useful, but they now need to add more value in figuring out how to get startups orders, and more importantly, how to get DoD and DOW the weapons and services they need rapidly. That's the game. So if I've made someone angry, great. You now ought to go look at yourself in the mirror and say, what value am I adding and what new value can I bring?
Beautiful answer. Beautiful answer. I mean, every service of the DOW in of itself is a Fortune 100 company. And you wouldn't go to each of those with the exact same message.
Right.
We tell companies that all the time. You've got to.
So that's the value to me of people who actually do this consulting. All right. Well, I know the name, right? Now I know the name. It's on page 302. Tell
now
me
you got to
I'm
get their
supposed to
attention.
say. Right.
Steve, I do want to make sure before we move on, where do people find this? I'm sure there's a lot of listeners who want, maybe hearing about this for the first time. Hopefully not, but if they are, where can they get it?
Yeah.
I knew you were going to ask that, and give me a second and let me figure it out.
We could hot link from the.
Yeah. We'll make sure to list it. Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't we list it? And
yeah, that's fine.
I'll put it on. Duh. It's like forgetting my social security number.
That's pretty cool.
But but I do want to remind your listeners, not only can you download the directory for free, there's an update list. So when updates come out, if you just sign up for the updates with a, and then starting later this year, we're going to put on Amazon the ability to have a printed copy, which you'll figure out how to just put it on for cost. And literally having those 300 pages in your hand give you more context than trying to scroll through them. Though the online version obviously allows you to search quickly, but boy, having that thing on your desk is pretty powerful.
Yeah. I see the immediate value for VCs and tech companies. And I guess I hadn't paused long enough to think, the department does it. It's hard to navigate your own department. And we even
So,
hear that too. So that's pretty cool. I love it.
so Megan, there are 10,000 copies around now. I mean,
Wow. Okay.
whoa, yeah, that's
I feel like
what
you
I
should
thought too.
walk into the Pentagon food court there on that bottom floor and just throw some copies around.
You know, this goes back to the point I made before. Anybody could have done this, right? There's no math involved here. There's no like secret sauce other than looking at a problem, looking around and going, well, I guess if no one else is going to do it, I'm going to do it. And your listeners ought to just remind themselves that they're all capable of this and more. Is that when you see a problem, like instead of just complaining, go figure out whether you could solve this or whether you could put together a group that solves this, whether you're outside the DOW or inside. You know, that is the mindset that we operate here. And it's not like anybody's smarter or whatever. It's just we believe that, you know, things that human beings create, other human beings can make better. And this just happens to be one example.
I think that's a beautiful way to summarize this conversation. But Billy, I think we're getting close to time. Should we do our fun part? We like to start with fun and end with fun, Steve.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Steve, we're going to put you on the spot, and this one's music related. I'm not sure if you're a music guy. I would imagine you are. You have a pretty
Tone deaf, completely tone deaf.
Oh no. Well, it's not about, you know, your musical
Yeah.
skill. It's about your musical taste, and it's more of we've already described. You're a well-known man. You're a legend. I'm sure you've spoken on hundreds of or thousands of stages at some point in your career. But the question always is, if you were coming up on stage, or if you were an athlete and you were walking up to the batter's box, something like that, and there was some music playing to sort of announce you, your walk-up music, what would it be?
Flight of the Valkyries by Wagner.
Nice.
He didn't even flinch.
No,
I love it.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you ready for that question? Did you get no,
No,
you had that ready
yeah.
to go.
Yeah, it's a you know, it's a pretty powerful piece.
Yeah.
And
It
it's
is.
also the best scene in Apocalypse Now.
Yeah. Great movie.
I just, when you answered that fast, I had this image of you walking around the valley with headphones in, playing it. Like, you've done this before.
I haven't. It was a good question though.
Well, now you can, and you'll think of us.
Well, I think that's it, Steve. You know, I think we could probably talk for dozens more hours about this because it's such a fascinating topic, and I think we just touched on the surface. But the things you do are immeasurably important, and you know, just the
Yeah.
PEO directory alone is a really cool thing that, you know, like you said, it took you a month to do, but nobody else did it. And I think we need more people out there like you that are willing to take the action and to do something about it. So, well, Steve, with that, you know, you've told us a lot of great, interesting stories, and you know, it's really, I think the things you do are immeasurably important to our national security and our defense, and we need more people like you doing things like that, whether it's the next PEO directory or things like that, actually taking action and you know, being the person who says, if not me, then who. So I appreciate you bringing that mindset, and appreciate you all that you've told us today. It was a really fascinating discussion, and definitely hope we could do this again in the near future.
Great. Thanks for having me, both of you.
All right. Over and out.